Honestly, the guitar.
Morgan, it is Tuesday, and you had mentioned something to me about the B2B Power doing a masterclass on writing. And I was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
but for sales? Are you sure?
I know the marketer brings up something about writing, and you're like, oh, God, what? We have to do copywriting or writing for some marketing piece? No, no, absolutely not. Writing as a key skill and tool for sellers. And boy, am I excited to be here today. So if you're here, make sure to drop a hi in chat because we want to say hi to you. Um, Nick, I mean, writing is such a key skill, especially navigating complex strategic sells.
Yeah, when I first met Nate Nasralla, he had said something to me that just blew my mind. He said, sellers don't win sales. Buyers
Mm.
do, but it typically happens when you're not in the room. That's when the big conversations happen. So how do we get invited when we're not? And what do we do to build champions and make sure they're ready to have those big conversations? And most of the time, because we were in person forever, we were in the room with them. But the last 4 to 5 years, it's flipped upside down. And so when we talked about buyer enablement and champion building and building those strategic narrative, I don't think you could have picked two better people to really have this big conversation that nobody's talking about.
I am so thrilled for today. So, everyone, please welcome our two lovely guests, Nate Nasralla and Brandon Fluharty. Yay! We're so excited to have both of them join us today on the show. What's up?
Hey guys, good to
Hey,
be
everyone.
here.
And Brandon, you're on the road, right?
On the road, yeah, in northern New Hampshire. I have the Starlink so I can connect to the beautiful internet and see everyone.
That's cool. I didn't know it was a Starlink. That's great. I don't know why. That's just cool.
Been
That's
so
a good
helpful.
speed too. To do a live
Decent.
stream.
Yeah, it's working so far so good. I've used it about 4 times and haven't been disappointed all times that I've used it. So yeah, kudos to the SpaceX team for designing a really good product.
That's
Love
super
it.
cool. Well, we like to start around here with a question of the day, just to get our audience to know our audience better. Do either of you have something you'd like to know about our audience?
Brandon, you let me know if you're thinking of one. Otherwise, I can jump in with one.
Well, it seemed like the theme that we were talking about earlier before the show is centered around travel. So I would love to understand, like, what is the number one travel tip the audience has out there? I could certainly use it right now.
I love it. Number one travel tip for Brandon, Nate, and us. Please drop it in chat. We'd love to see your answers. Warm it up. How about for everybody here? What's your number one? Do you have a number one travel tip, Nate?
My it's more of a rule than a tip, but it's never come back from one trip until the next one is on the calendar. So it's a rule we try to live by. That way you're coming back and you always have something to look forward to, because like getting back, getting into the, resuming quote normal life isn't always everybody's favorite thing. So it helps with the re-entry a little bit.
Love it.
I love what Ryder said there. Compression socks. That's like a new discovery for me. Like driving, we were, long stretches of like 9 hours at a time, and the compression socks were so invaluable. That's a good tip.
Mm-hmm. I like Michael's tip: find a local and buy them a beer. Number one rule.
There you
That's a
go.
great one.
Always
Yeah.
good.
Nathan's: bring outfits and carry-ons because airlines will lose your checked luggage. Yep. Leave room for serendipity.
That's
Roll your
a
clothes. Mm-hmm.
that's
Roll
a
your
good
clothes in a
one.
dry cleaner bag. I love all
Actually,
these.
yeah, actually, Brandon, you were just talking about packing everything in so tight. I think Dorothy's was a good point. My wife and I just
Yeah.
got back from the UK a couple weeks ago as well, and we tried to do a different city every day. And it's just,
Nice.
it's a lot when you're trying to go all around. So I like Dorothy's. It sticks out to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Back when I was a road warrior, I had 2 of everything, so I didn't have to think about packing. It was just grab my bag and go.
I
Yep.
love
There
that.
There was a time in my sales career I was on 52 flights inside of 6 months. And so I didn't unpack that bag. I just lived out of it even when I was home because it was just the same set of stuff that I would recycle.
Yep. Yep.
That's crazy. Yeah, honestly, I think I don't have any advice that hasn't already been stated. I've very gratefully been able to travel a lot over the last few months, especially compared to for me, a dry spell over the pandemic, since I love for both pleasure and work to travel. Um, I've actually always had the only little funny story. I think Rob had said like, never check a bag. I've always had great experiences with checked luggage. I've just never had I've always gotten lucky, and I know it's luck. I've never had like lost luggage. I've had some scary moments where I thought they lost it, but never lost luggage. So, but I definitely agree. Like traveling light is much easier.
So I never check a bag. The thing that I do check is my bike. Brandon, I know you're a cyclist too. And there was a time when I shipped my bike back. We were doing a ride in Sweden, and then we wanted to go travel afterward, and it got hung up in customs for like 4 months. So it was like 4 months without my favorite bike, and that was my check bag experience. And so I was like, never again.
Yeah.
4 months.
That's the exact reason why I don't take my bike, even though it would be really great to have my bike with the customizations and everything perfect to me. As you know, as a cyclist, it's so important. But I've just gotten into the habit of renting a bike wherever I go, and that helps me to discover new bikes that I never would have ridden
There you
before. Yeah, so yeah, that's a new rule. There we go.
Hey,
Any cyclists out there, rent your bike.
Well, Nick, shall we dive in today?
The one thing I'll just add in is noise canceling headphones. I never realized how nice that was until the first time I took my noise canceling headphones on a flight. It doesn't matter what flight you're on, it's fine. And download movies, just in case.
I love that.
Okay.
Yes, I'm trying not to jinx myself. I'm going to Seattle this weekend, so like I am checking a bag, so hopefully we're gonna keep this lucky streak going.
If possible, never leave your laptop at the hotel.
I love all the
good
tips.
advice.
It's great. Well, Nick, where do you want to begin today?
So I heard Nate talk about something when it came to building your strategic narrative, because it's one of the hardest things to do. And a lot of us have never seen one done before. And I was listening to a podcast that you're on, so thank you for always promoting those, because it like creates my nice short list of things to listen to. You talk about a Mad Lib style strategic narrative. Could we start there and dive into maybe a little bit how you got started with that and what that could sound like and look like?
Yeah, so I guess first the definition of a narrative, which can be a bit of a vague word if you've not used that in the context of a strategic or a complex sale. Basically, a narrative is a way of packaging up an idea so that it can influence others and travel around the organization. And so when it comes to building and crafting a narrative, because nothing gets done inside of the enterprise without a really strong narrative to back it, what you want to do is two things. One, have a really good framework that you can build from. So writing isn't just like this loose form creative art. There are some like practices and rules that you can use in order to sharpen up your words very quickly. So one, framework, there's some flexibility. And then two, your buyer's words. So a kind of a fast, fail-safe way to make sure that your writing resonates with the person that's receiving it is to use the language of the people that you're talking to. The shorthand kind of internal phrases that they're already used to hearing and will be sharing with their team. So the analogy for this is Mad Libs. And you've probably, if you've joined a live session like Lavender Live, it was in the context of emails. Here, it's in the context of a narrative. Mad Libs is this old game, if you're not familiar with it, where as a kid, you would answer questions to write in basically a fill-in-the-blank storyline. And so the idea of building a narrative, Mad Lib style, is to start with a framework, then thoughtful notes that capture your buyer's words to basically fill in the blanks. And it's an easy way if maybe you're showing up today and you're like, hey, I don't write often. I want to get better. Like I'm a little anxious about going deep because I don't see myself as a writer yet. This is an easy way to get you started.
So good. Brandon.
Yeah, filling in the blanks is much better than staring at a blank page for sure. And I really got into narrative writing out of necessity. And, I think Nate really hits it on the head there that writing stories, narratives, is different than other types of writing. And I really happened upon it really out of necessity, I would say. So, kind of grounding another sort of key takeaway for folks who are looking to instill a writing habit is kind of understand your why. And my why getting into narrative writing was I didn't have any formal education in writing other than just an interest in it, but it really came about out of necessity in the sense that I'm an introverted seller. I haven't been shy of talking about that. And so writing almost became sort of a therapy in some ways, but more so really a desire for efficiency because I'm lazy. And I wanted to have a super skill that created a foundation for enhancing other skills that weren't so natural to me, like presenting in a room, public speaking. A lot of those things were challenges for me, but I found the more that I wrote in advance, it helped me to feel more comfortable. It helped me to feel more prepared. And it helped crystallize a lot of those thoughts so that I could think through those things more clearly. I could speak to those things more clearly. And again, a more narrative format, telling a story. If I didn't do that groundwork of having the writing beforehand, I would have, just stumbled in every meeting or every speaking engagement, even if it was something as simple as a discovery call or running a demo. Writing helped me to clarify those thoughts and up leveled all of the ancillary skills that we need in sales. And I think that's a really important thing to consider, even if you don't consider yourself an introverted seller, even if you're the most extroverted, personable, you can run off the cuff, speak to anyone, command a room. Writing will help do a lot of the selling for you and enhance those skills, as Nate was alluding to earlier, when you're not in the room. And I think that that's becoming more and more critical. And I hope that we can unpack that a little bit further. This idea of asynchronous selling in today's world.
So I want to jump in before we go on the asynchronous topic, which obviously I love, one of my favorite elements of the discussion. I hope everybody hears and takes away one point that Brandon just raised, which is writing isn't just about writing in words that stay on a page. The more, like I see Will's comment, clear writing equals clear thinking. The more you write, the more you show up in a way that is articulate and you're communicating the things that you want to communicate. And Brandon, I relate to what you're saying. I also consider myself an introverted seller. And how I started writing was before more internal, kind of crucial conversations. The definition of a crucial conversation is it's likely to be emotionally charged, no certain outcome. And so I wanted to walk in actually understanding what it was that I thought about that topic so that I could communicate well. And so I would just write up a little internal memo that packaged up the things that I wanted to say. It gave me a space where I could edit, rewrite, make sure that I wasn't saying something that I would regret later I didn't want to say. And then I realized, oh, hey, those conversations with executives that I'm a little scared about coming up, actually, it's the same type thing. When I sit down and I write out exactly what I want to say in person, how I communicate goes so much better and I'm so much more clear. So anyway, I hope that's one of the headlines is like, yes, we're talking about putting words on a page, but also how you show up. And even in a setting like this, most of what we're saying, I'm sure we've written about and written down. And actually, you had a great post on this topic, the high ROI skill and discipline, at the end of last month. And so, man, when you write, your words just spoken verbally show up much better as well.
That's right.
Yeah. This is the thing that I want to make sure I don't lose is maybe some insights into developing this framework for a narrative, because obviously the thing that we hear most, and I'm as a creative and as somebody who's done creative work, I've suffered from this in a different setting, but blank page syndrome is forever the curse of anybody trying to write, and it's that, okay, what do I start with? And so I love this idea of having a framework, having a box that you can at least begin with. So for each of you, what does that framework look like or sound like? What are the main things what are the main walls of that box that you're constructing, so that that starting point is a real strong foundation for this narrative you're crafting?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Nate talk about probably the best framework that I've seen out there for effective narrative writing as it relates to enterprise and strategic selling. And it's sort of something that if I were to design the perfect one, Nate's already done it. And looking back on the most prolific time period of my strategic sales career over the past 4 years, using a template like this was sort of the foundation to every key account that I was able to close with a great team supporting those efforts. Because I was able to use the same sort of template externally with the prospect, also internally with the team that I wanted to sort of rally behind the cause, because the internal sell can be just as difficult as the external one. So I wanted to make sure that I was pulling in folks and exciting them. And that takes telling a story. Why do you want to commit your time when there are so many other projects vying for that time? How do we save time? And instead of having a meeting of 6 people, can we consolidate that down to less meetings using, say, a one-page memo that conveys our thoughts and the needs to keep moving a deal forward? 6 folks in a 1-hour meeting is not a 1-hour meeting. That's 6 hours that were taken away from those busy executives' times. So again, I needed to be conscious of that internally with our own executives. But the same thing happens with our prospects. And I discovered this, way later than I wish, and discovering what Nate has sort of put out there to the world, which I think is a really effective template. But the key thing for me is bringing the headline up front. Is what's the hook? Why should I care about this? When you think about a busy executive, whether that's your own CEO or a prospective CEO or a client C-level executive, why should they care? In 30 seconds, in 90 seconds, in 2 minutes, can they understand? And should they want to go deeper, they can. Nate, what are your thoughts? I would love to hear sort of a breakdown of how you came about your framework and why it's so effective.
Yeah. So I really like, by the way, the last rule that you were touching on, bluff, bottom line up front. Like that's something that you can apply across different mediums, regardless on if it's a memo, an email, a deck, or a proposal. Like bluff, bottom line up front. It's a good rule to live by. I think the kind of framework for a one-page memo or business case that you're referencing has 4 different parts inside of it, and I came across it through a combination of 1, experimentation, and then 2, pulling from some other frameworks. Things like there's one in management consulting called SCRI, which is a very popular one. So it's basically adapting. And it's kind of this like Frankenstein, I guess, of multiple different things that I liked about other frameworks and then kind of came together inside of one. So the basic kind of sections, 4 parts, is 1, the problem or the problem statement. Are you finding and framing a high cost and, to Brandon's point, a high priority problem that's worth solving ahead of other things? Then there's the approach. You need to build some type of logical bridge between, most people jump deep into product features, but you need to bridge the problem and then the way in which you're going to go about solving that. The payoff, like what's the direct tie into some type of executive level metric? What's the before and after over what time frame? And then the last piece of this is the investment. What's the time, trade-off, resources that somebody needs to evaluate a decision, which obviously is the end goal, is influencing and driving toward consensus for a decision. And the reason why we've used several times this idea of one page, it's actually very challenging to write this inside of one page. because you are distilling and crystallizing everything, which is contrary to what most people grow up thinking about writing. Is the more I produce, the better writer I am. Book reports and like everything that you were doing in university and college. It's like, this must be X number of pages. It's actually the opposite, which was Brandon's point earlier, is like when you are talking with an executive, it is a very costly meeting for that company. In fact, I'll tell you kind of one quick story on this, just so I can drive home the point why it's worth spending the extra time and energy of crystallizing and distilling everything down into a page, basically doing the work for your audience. So 2 companies ago, as part of the executive leadership team, we would have a meeting every single Tuesday where we would talk about kind of big company priorities. And there was one meeting where everybody showed up kind of unprepared. It was basically the Tuesday after the quarter ended last quarter. So it was the start of Q4, and everybody was just, there without kind of a point of view on what we needed to discuss. So 5 minutes into the meeting, our CEO just canceled it. He's like, everybody, we're done. And his point was, this is the most expensive thing that the company does. The most highly paid people all in a room for an extended period of time, 90 minutes. So if we're not going to make the most of this, it's pointless. It's a bad use of company resources. So we're out of here. And then that was it. And it was like we were all in person at this time. So it was like very awkward to like everybody gather your things and walk out of the room. But it just puts a fine point on this idea that when you are thinking and showing up, having 1, written something that you want to maybe share as a pre-read, or 2, speak to and guide the message during that conversation, everything just works that much more effectively inside of a personal conversation.
And to further hit that home, I learned this again through just osmosis, because I learned that Amazon built their behemoth company on a writing practice, and Jeff Bezos eliminated presentations on the PowerPoint from all meetings, and they got in a habit of writing the 6-page memo, or their product teams got into this habit of writing the PRFAQ, which stands for press release, frequently asked questions. And we had a lot of Amazonians in my time at LivePerson before I retired as a corporate seller. A lot of Amazonians came over to LivePerson, and I was really introduced to these 2 practices. But I was really drawn to the PRFAQ, and I was curious about applying this template, or I shouldn't say a template, but this framework towards sales motion. And back to the point that Nate was harping upon, when you have to distill down your thoughts into a 1-page memo and then explain that further through frequently asked questions, again, it helps you as a seller to crystallize your thoughts, that you can recite these ideas and tell your story with crystal clarity, because you've honed that 1-page memo over and over. You've iterated on it. It's more not about the writing, it's more the editing process to get it down to a 1-page memo. That's really the effective part that instills these thoughts and these clarity, and that has a lasting effect on how you can help get that share of that virality in pitching to. So the just to sort of button this up on the PRFAQ framework, the press release, the way it's really effective is to write a press release. So you have a headline, a subheadline, and then you write a 1-page press release about something in the future, typically 1 year in the future. And if you think about that as a seller, particularly to be more strategic, imagine writing a press release for your prospect or your client, talking about what a relationship would look like in 1 year's time or 3 years' time, and working backwards and answering questions, which is the second piece to the PRFAQ, answering the frequently asked questions of, well, how do we get there? How do we bring this reality to life? And it's a really effective framework for you as a seller to distill your thoughts, edit your thoughts, curate your thoughts into a short piece and then answer those questions and then deliver that in a package, in a format that's very easy to share as executives. And for me as an executive to understand, I guess, yes, I want to invest my time in this. We should invest budget and resources behind this initiative.
So Morgan, Nick, I think we can just keep rolling. Like we're going to keep building off of each other. So what Brandon just mentioned has also influenced my thinking. In fact, so if you go to the playbook on enterprise sales that I put out there, the very first sentence is, in a letter to Amazon shareholders, Jeff Bezos wrote. And actually, let me read this one quote because I think it builds on this concept. So he writes, "We don't do PowerPoint presentations at Amazon. Instead, we write narratively structured memos. The great memos are written and rewritten, shared with colleagues who are asked to improve the work, set aside for a couple of days, and then edited again with a fresh mind. They simply can't be done in a day or two." And I think that's pretty profound because part of what he's getting at is the asynchronous sale that Brandon brought up and mentioned earlier is you're not the sole author, and you shouldn't be the sole author of the writing in the enterprise context. You're partnering and co-creating alongside a champion or a mobilizer so that by the time this piece does make its way to the executive, there's ownership on the internal team. And by the way, they speak an internal language that you own as an external seller. And so it is going to get far better if you are doing it with them. But of course, your job is to put pen to paper to create the first draft. Again, you can pull a framework off. And if you've never heard of the PR FAQ framework, it's a good one to look at. And it's one that I've used specifically the press release piece. So a role prior to this, we were selling into innovation teams at Fortune 500 companies, people charged with finding new products, new markets to enter. And so the press release framework was especially effective because what we were writing out was what that CEO or business unit head would want to tell the markets publicly. And so this writing wasn't just like us communicating to them about our product. It was saying, hey, this is what you can say to everybody outside of your company. Your words outside, wouldn't this be fun if a year from now you were shouting this from the rooftops? And that's the mark of good writing is you can place people into a new situation. You can pull the future forward and have them sit in that, feel and see the emotion behind that. And of course, you can do this in written conversation as well, but there's just something about letting the imagination go when somebody is reading that is just that much more powerful.
I don't want to lose the thread on something that is important for the PR FAQ format, but also is one of the key elements you brought up, Nate, which is the bridge between the problem and the product. And I believe you called that the approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, as somebody who sells services, the approach is really straightforward because it's like, oh, well, this is the way we're strategically thinking about the problem and the solution to the problem. And I see a lot of the time sellers, I think, struggle with that bridge when they're selling a product. And some of that's to do with the training and the culture and the deep, know-how inside an enterprise about what all of our customized, feature set solutions could be for some large customer of ours. So what does that approach sound like for a seller to bridge the problem statement and more of the product style? And I imagine this same sort of language is introduced into the PR FAQ because I can see it being folded in.
Yeah. So ever the framework nerd, there's one other that you want to look at here that's very helpful. It's called a driver tree or a driver graph. And basically what it does is it connects all of the different metrics inside of an enterprise to each other to show, for example, revenue may be average revenue per account times the number of existing accounts plus new accounts, right? And so once you understand the breakdown of how a company makes money and loses money, you can understand all of the different levers and drivers that an executive can choose to pull in order to address a problem or hit a goal. So in the context of, let's say, driving revenue, that's a very high level metric. If you're selling something that helps with new sales, generate new pipeline, you need that executive first to believe that they should prioritize that over upselling or expanding revenue from existing accounts. Something that has nothing to do with your product or its comparison to other competitors or other products out there. Or like, at LivePerson, if you're trying to boost, the NPS score. Let's say that's the chief experience officer's goal. Like, you need them to believe that live chat, like interacting with somebody real time versus some other method, is the way to go about it. So that's basically the idea of the approach. Is don't get too deep into features and product just yet, because there are so many different paths that an executive could choose.
Yeah, and I think what you're hitting on is so key that we should take a moment out here to sort of really harp on, which is that's a really descriptive way of thinking about it. There are levers to pull for executives, and getting an executive to believe in something, that's really the output of quality, effective narrative writing, is to sort of state your case in a really crisp fashion that this is important, more important than something else. And what you're equipping somebody with a really good piece is that they now have a lever to pull. Again, to sort of bring the live person example, because it was uh, really how I closed 50 million in less than 4 years, was equipping folks who had sort of been in the dark for so long, for decades in a business, which were contact center leaders. If you were running a contact center leader, you were sort of pushed to the side as an executive, in that it wasn't important. And so what I tried to do with effective narrative writing is to show them that you can have a seat at the table. You deserve a seat at the table. In fact, you will be in a position to start being a leader who is on the front lines telling marketing what they should be doing with their budget. You should be telling your executive leaders, here is what we're understanding from our customers, because we are there living it. And so that became a really exciting thing for me, because I didn't feel like I was a seller. I felt more like a writer who had to share this story with more and more people. And the more I wrote, it felt like it was almost negligence to not be connecting with these Fortune 50, Fortune 100 level accounts and these executives who were in the seat of running contact centers. They needed this. And so telling the story helped me, uh, fine tune my own approach and narrow in on accounts. And that gave me, again, as an introverted seller, a whole lot of confidence to reach out to them for the first time, to work with our SDRs, to have really targeted outreach. And we could distill these narratives and chop them up into bite-sized chunks that could be used as emails. They could be used as LinkedIn in-mails and messages, video scripts that were really short and punchy, but effective because they weaved in the narrative. They told a story. Your role matters. Now is your time to shine as a contact center leader. We are in a position to tell you how to do that. And that's what got them to really lean into what we had to say, because nobody else was saying that in the marketplace.
And if I can double down on that, the practice that Brandon's talking about is entering the conversation in your prospect's mind or in your reader's mind. When what you're writing matches the words and the thoughts that they're already having, that's when they're immediately engaged. And so as opposed to writing to this company, he's writing to a person with hopes and dreams and needs and fears. And they're feeling like, hey, I'm looked at as this like back office admin function as opposed to a central leadership priority. I deserve a seat at the table. And Brandon comes along and writes that out. They're like, heck yeah, I like this Brandon guy. He is writing what I'm feeling. Of course, I'm going to respond to this, right? So that's the idea: is enter into the conversation that is already playing out in your prospect's mind, which takes knowing your customer through and through. And what you write is going to resonate.
I don't, Nick, go ahead.
No, I think about this from a prospecting lens and how that changes the entire conversation. Because now you're the detective and you have your value hypothesis. And you're like, based on my experience doing this and talking to so many people, this needs to be true. If it's not true, I can fix it or see if you're ready. So you're looking for proof as you're going, almost like, this is what I'm going to take to court to make my case. And now when you're prospecting, you're reaching out to those 5 or 10 people that need to know you exist with the specific information they need to better their role or tie it to the bigger overarching goal. Priority 1 or 2 is all we ever get when we're selling, or else you're pushed off to the next quarter or whenever. But I just think of how this would change that whole narrative prospecting. And this is like that, talk about building momentum in your prospecting and starting out with like a real driver. Well, of course, they're going to see that this is something so much bigger. So they're going to pass this on. And now it's a team effort versus you trying to fight just to get in the door.
Yeah, it's a team effort. I think, really driving home that, and Nate mentioned this earlier, is you give them enough. And I might be dating myself here, but I was obsessed in my preteens and about 6th grade, reading those choose your own stories books. So you'd get to the end of a chapter and then you could sort of choose your own ending, and that would take you to a different page. It's sort of the same concept here, where you give enough. You're sort of starting with the first chapter or handful of chapters, and that's repeatable, right? You can use that in all of your prospecting motions, but then you're inviting that particular executive to write their own ending, and that's when you pull them in, and you're using effective tools to use their language, their specificity, things that you can only uncover once you're inside their 4 walls. And that's what I found, again, the beauty of writing, because it was, again, that skill that made everything easier for me. It was already the foundation to get me in, and then we can unpack that using these frameworks or a format like the PRFAQ to say, okay, is this going to be an effective way, you mobilizer or you champion, to help you do your job? Because we know this is important. We've already established that in the first chapter. Now the next chapter is, I need your help, and I need to pull you in to help write the rest of this if we are going to complete this. I just actually had an executive of a Fortune 10 company on last night to my community, and he was talking about why transformations are important to him. And he mentioned leaving an executive legacy is something really important, and he wished more and more enterprise and strategic sellers could help him to articulate that, because it's a hard job internally, getting the politicking and getting a large organization, getting multiple business units, multiple teams to buy into a vision. And so that's where, again, an effective piece that enables that executive to go and say, I don't have to build this from scratch. It's already not, 80% done. And it's 20% my effort now to do that. Which seller, which team do you think that executive is going to lean into more? Somebody who's done 80% of the work, or somebody who is coming in and trying to build something from scratch?
Totally. I'm just basking in the glory of the wisdom of this edition. It's so good. So oh yeah, Nate, go ahead. I had one question to sort of change paths. So if we're gonna,
no, I'm sorry. Every time Brandon says something, I'm like nodding over here, and I'm like, yes. I'll rewind the tape just very slightly to call out one thing, which is like the choose your own adventure path. It's really important in your writing to name what's at stake and to point out 2 different paths for how the story ends. And in the words of like sales, it's a problem or a payoff. In the ancient kind of story framework, it's tragedy or comedy, right? One of these will happen, right? You do nothing, this is going to get worse, tragedy, problems. Or you go this route, you choose this path and good things happen. And if you don't make that choice clear, serve it up like the books of old did, and I love those. And actually, Bear Grylls like rebooted this concept in a Netflix series that was kind of fun to see. But anyway, it's really important to basically name and call out or label those paths: problem, payoff, comedy, tragedy.
One of the things that is fairly common wisdom that gets kind of thrown around on LinkedIn and elsewhere is that getting better at writing is a lot like, riding a bicycle. Like, you just have to do it. You just got to figure it out as you go. It's that practice of actually doing the writing that gets you better at writing. So for both of you, what are those practices and habits that you're using to improve your writing? And especially, I'm thinking outside of just the narrative structure on the day to day or working with a specific client. Like, what other things are you doing to build this skill?
You want to start, Nate?
Sure, I'll start. So one of the things that most people hate doing is just working from a blank page. So one thing that you can do is grab other people's writing and edit and rewrite it and say, how would I make this better? Because most people, they stumble on their own thoughts and they're like, it's just this gap between the brain and the page. So take what somebody else wrote and try to make it better. Look at and read some of the old copywriting shortcuts, things like getting rid of weasel words, varying sentence length. There are small things that you can then apply to that writing to make it better. And then you've already built up that muscle memory. So when it comes to writing yourself, you'll be able to do that that much more kind of easily. The other thing that you want to do is just get in the words, get in the habit of reshaping and reconfiguring words, as opposed to thinking about writing start to finish in a perfect flow. And so most people's train of thought won't be crystal clear in the perfect framework. Things like, by the way, the Minto Pyramid is a good framework to look at, which we haven't mentioned. But the idea is like, just put it down on there with the goal of making it all disconnected so that you can reshape and reconfigure. And then the very last thing that I'll say is write anything. It literally does not matter what you want to write. I wrote some like personal memoir stuff about stories from my life, and that I find translating into the business world. The key thing is whatever you enjoy. If you don't enjoy it at the start, you're not going to make a habit of it. So find something that you enjoy that will keep you consistent. And then you can apply the things that you're feeling stronger and more confident into the other forms of writing.
Yeah, I'll double down on that point. You really need to enjoy the process and enjoy the writing, because that's going to unlock the flow to want to continue to write further. I think one of the pivotal moments that I found in my career was writing for myself first, or writing to become clearer about myself first. That can be as simple as just writing in a journal. And there are different journals out there that can help prompt you. That can be very useful for some folks. Again, instead of looking at a blank page, you're prompted with some reflective, introspective questions that can help you to put pen to paper, literally pen to paper. And there is something to be said for physically writing versus looking at a screen or typing something out. So physically writing in a journal is a great way to start. Gratitude was something that was really important for me. But something that really became a blocker for me was overcoming imposter syndrome. When I started actually finding success and I was top of the leaderboard, I started working with coaches, and I said to them point blank, I still don't feel confident. Even though people would say that I am a confident person, I didn't feel that inside. And so again, back to what I was saying earlier, writing became a bit of a form of therapy for me. But more so in the sense that it helped elevate my professional career, and then have these ancillary benefits of how I communicated in person, how I demoed, how I handled discovery calls. But internally, it helped me to overcome imposter syndrome, because the thing that we started with my coach, Amber Dybert, was, well, why don't you just document your past successes? Part of feeling imposter syndrome is you feel like a fraud, or you felt like you got lucky, or you felt like you're not deserving of the success that you're achieving and you're about to be found out. Documenting the successes helped set me down a path of turning those into narratives. And by simply documenting the successes, I didn't just deconstruct the wins of that account. I turned them more into a story. And then once I turned them into a story, then I started experimenting and saying, well, interesting. I could talk about myself all day, which is a really important topic. But what if I start writing these stories in a format that would help my executives or help the internal stakeholders who I'm trying to pull into a deal to help me win this Fortune 50 7-figure deal? And that's really what was the starting point. So starting with yourself, documenting your past successes, turning those past successes into stories as if you were teaching someone else. And that was sort of the mental reframe that I was doing was, okay, I want somebody else to read this story. And how would I need to write this in a way that made an impact? That turned just documenting into this narrative format. And then once I got hooked on telling, it was game over. It just became easier and easier. And because it was enjoyable, it felt like a fun game to play every day. And now I do some sort of writing every day, whether that's in a journal or posting every day on LinkedIn, and using, now that I'm more of a content creator than a seller, I use tools like TypeShare that has pre-built frameworks that I don't have to look at a blank page. I can sort of take this structure and then fill in, choose my own adventure, and go.
I want to add one other word on this topic. One, because it's very important to writing well. Two, yesterday was Mental Health Awareness Day. So part of what Brandon is talking about is a very well researched and documented approach called narrative therapy or logotherapy. If you're interested in it, Viktor Frankl is one of like the best reads on this, Man's Search for Meaning. And the idea is that when you begin writing out your own story, you're able to make sense of it, number one. Number two, you're able to spot and call out certain lies that just aren't true, imposter syndrome being one. An exercise that my therapist has me do is write out what story am I believing, situation I'm creating, and emotion I'm feeling. And when I do that, then I can begin to say, okay, this is truth, this is a lie. And the reason why this is really important, not just as like being a human who feels things and thinks things that aren't always helpful or healthy. The other piece of it that you'll come to find is when you're trying to produce something that is creative, designed, and will resonate with somebody else, fear, insecurity is the opposite. And it's the anti-creativity, because you, in that moment, are thinking about what you're feeling and what you're scared of, as opposed to only thinking about the reader. And so if you truly want to write something that will resonate, you have to think about them, which is you can't be writing from a place of fear. And that only comes from some of the self-work. So if you're thinking that Brandon and I are just talking about something, which on its own you should be doing to let yourself be human, and breathe and feel, but it also comes back around because sales is a human-centered business. They're inextricably linked.
Early on in my creative career, this resonates so well because I had some like early wins, projects that went really well and that were splashy. And I was struggling to tell that in a way that would both interest clients and also employers. Like this was a fundamental challenge, which is like, I did all this work, I don't know how to talk about it. And so a creative, I don't know, coach, if that's the right word here, but a mentor at the very least, was like, write this as if you're telling, like write out what happened as if you're telling the story to somebody else. And what do they need to know? What's impactful to them? So all this lines up so neatly because I remember I had done, I think 3 or 4 of them. And the challenge was to keep it in like a page as well, because they're fairly large projects. So that, again, that condensing, the clarity, the challenge of that. And I remember after that, not only having a lot of confidence, self-confidence to talk about these projects, but a lot of clarity to almost riff off of. And I think we've sort of hinted at this, but I personally have found this so impactful where even though we've spent so much time distilling and clarifying our thoughts into a PR FAQ, into a one-page memo, into a story about here's what happened. It's not a straitjacket. And in many ways, it's like a launching pad for better conversations where I always felt more equipped and more confident in those conversations because I had the roadmap, what I had written out, the clarity from that. But then I could launch off in some other direction because of that like strong foundation. So just to affirm and double down on this advice, I found that useful in even a very different career than sales. Just like retelling that story to ourselves allows us to share that more effectively in our careers or with prospects or whoever we're trying to connect with.
That's right. And we're told so often empathy is such an important skill. And I agree with that. And Nate said it best, sales is a human-centered role. And more, we're getting away from that human approach. There's a human on our side, there is a human on the other side. And in between, there needs to be a connection. There needs to be an understanding. And how do you bridge that connection? How do you build better understanding? Well, writing starts to become a really efficient way to do that. And, you hit it, Morgan. It starts to be an invitation. You write to have an invitation for others to then collaborate with you. And that's true empathy. And having writing as a foundation, again, just brings that home. And the more that you do it, the more empathy that you can have. And the more it serves as a reminder to you as the individual, but also as an invitation to whoever you're engaging with. I want to connect with you. I want to understand. Here's a starting point, and I'm going to now pass the pen to you to help complete this adventure, fill this out.
For the last couple of minutes, the thing that keeps jumping in my brain is, what about the rules? Because you talked about prompts, but what about the rules? What have you learned as like the black and white things? Like I know one thing I really struggle with is editing while I'm writing. Therefore, nothing gets done. And so even with me and Morgan writing show notes, it's easier for one of us just to write, the other one to come back and edit. But what other rules do you have for writing that, when practiced, just make you a better writer right away?
You want to go, Brandon?
Well, I was just going to say, Nicholas, you hit on one right there, is when you write, and when you edit. Don't try to combine both. That's sort of, and we already talked about another one, Bluff. I love that one, Nate. But those are two rules that I live by.
So agreed. Those are good ones. Some other ones is less words is always going to be better than more. Simple words is always going to be better than more like complex vocabularies. Most people read with their eyes before they just kind of, everybody always reads with their eyes, but the point is they read visually the structure of what they're reading, and then they go deep into the words. So headlines, bold, bullets, usually people are scanning before they decide to go deep. So write with that in mind. Active voice is always better than passive voice. So the kind of the last, there's a whole bunch of copywriting shortcuts and headlines. I guess the last one that I would say is substitute vague things for numbers and specifics and data points instead of saying like nearly half of people miss their goal. Say 48% of people miss their goal. Those are some like pretty black and white things that it's just like, do this and it'll come out better.
Yeah.
Can I offer one more, Nick? And we sort of talked about this, but this is more of a creative exercise, and this comes back to the bluff, the bottom line up front, or headline creation, is never stick with the first headline you create. I think headline creation is an art to itself. And there's a reason that, agencies employ creative people to do ad writing and headline creating. And if the thing that always helped me get through a headline block or like something doesn't sound right is to write at least 20 headlines of the ways that I would like try and do it, and just one after the other. And then either reshape a couple, or, oh, that's actually good by itself, and pull that in. Because I've always found myself, like, if there's an opportunity to put the bottom line up front, I'm always like, what is that first headline? And I get into that writing, editing paralysis at the same time. And it's better to, I think, do the headline creation all at once and then come back and edit it or reshape it later.
Well, even with
Yeah.
that, one thing you do is you'll reach out for help too. I think that's one thing that's very often forgotten with writing. It's a team. You can be a team sport if you want it to be. And the only time that becomes negative is when you're not open to advice. You know, especially with building on LinkedIn, you're building in public. If you're never open to the feedback or getting challenged, it may not be the right place to write.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think a few really key things to hammer home here is writing in public is a really, it's a scary thing for a lot of folks, but that's going to be the key to improve your writing, because you're going to get immediate feedback. You know, no longer, you know, this archaic idea of a, you know, I've got to lock myself into a cabin in the woods to become a really good writer. It's actually not very effective in today's modern world, because you're not necessarily capturing the feedback, instant feedback that we can from LinkedIn or Twitter or Medium, where it's not just about the dopamine hits. Obviously, it's about collecting real feedback. Are you looking for questions from your prospects and then distilling those ideas into social posts on LinkedIn? Are you taking your top 3 ideas that you're hearing from prospects all the time, or top 3 questions, writing about that, and then getting further feedback? Is this resonating with my target audience? That insight can never be done without writing, and writing in public to get that feedback. Another key thing I want to just really hit home on, because I see so many sellers missing the mark here. Nate brought up writing in plain speak. I think there's way too much emphasis on using buzzwords and jargon almost instinctively, because we are taught as sellers to use these internal buzzwords and industry jargon, and we almost just spew them. Writing more plainly and clearly is a way to remove that, and you're going to separate yourself by speaking more plainly and with a calmer tone and voice. And the sort of the rule that I use is talk as if you're, you know, write or talk as if you were speaking to a 5th grader or trying to explain something to your grandmother.
That's right. On that, there's a whole book called The Mom Test, by the way, on that topic, how to explain things simply. And then the last thing I'll just double down on is if you listen to a call recording with a manager and you listen to a call recording with an executive, you'll notice that the executive actually uses far simpler language. And it's the mark of basically tenure and experience is you learn how to communicate things in a way people understand. Optimize for understanding. That's the goal.
Well, that's interesting.
I could literally sit here with you all for the rest of today, and continue to just download the amazing wisdom and intelligence from your brains, because this was an amazing power hour. So thank you both for joining today. I saw so many chats already about thanking you for such a great session. This is truly an awesome one. I might have to jump in like the next minute, so I'm just going to close out my side. Is where can people find you? And then we'll let Nick close out.
Well, obviously LinkedIn. That's the place to start. And then you'll see both Brandon and I share a lot of our own writing, things that we're posting to our own blogs through LinkedIn. And then for me, you can also check out fluent.io/blog. And that's where I post all my writing.
It's awesome.
And for me, it's brandonfluharty.com. I try to put everything there, including writing every week a new article. So you can find me there when not on LinkedIn.
Both incredible resources, guys. Highly recommend signing up for their newsletters and getting the notifications. You will not be disappointed. And usually my wrap up with it's 2022. It's no longer acceptable to suffer in silence. But Nate actually hinted on something that I want to give a challenge to everyone. If you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling depressed, if you're hard on yourself and it's getting in the way of doing good work, let's turn this into a narrative. And so I challenge you to rewrite your about section on your LinkedIn profile. But I want you to take that strategic narrative and turn it into your profile. Really own your story of all those successes that have built you, the mistakes that you made that define the way you look at the world. And let's turn that into a narrative that you are proud of and you're proud to share. And when you're ready, shoot any of us a DM and I would be happy to review it for you and give you feedback. Thank you so much. And both Nate and Brandon, we really appreciate you. And I'm going to be listening to this at least 8 times. So if anybody wants my notes, let me know.
Well, thanks guys. Everyone. It was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Everyone.
Happy Tuesday. Bye.
Yep.